Fantastic. Well, thank you. I want to give a big welcome this morning to those that are gathered at the Old Station Cafe. I reckon that's fantastic. You've got your coffees, you can have some cake there, breakfast even. And I know that you are watching this live, and so just a big welcome to you this morning. I was thinking this week about what I could speak on, and it really sort of got me that once we settle the issue of food and shelter, if once that sort of basic need is established for our life, the next four basic needs, the longings the human heart just really desperately wants, is to be loved, to be valued, to have meaning and purpose in life where we have a reason to get up, where people value us not just for what we can do, but for actually who we are, and a sense of belonging, a place to call home where we're known and we know people. If we're missing, someone would notice us. Now, the degree to which any one of those is low or missing is the degree to how messed up we are in life. The degree of our pain, the discomfort that we feel inside. When I was in Sydney, one of my roles was to be I was part of the Southwest District's executive of the ACC. And in that role, from time to time, I would interview potential pastors that were wanting to get their credentials with the Australian Christian churches, and they may already be leading a church. But the idea was that we'd meet with them, we'd ask them questions on theology, we would ask them questions on how their marriage was, how their financial affairs were. And the aim behind all this was to safeguard churches and people from having people with credentials that are leading but have life-controlling problems. And one day I was talking to the secretary of the Australian Christian Churches in Sydney, and I said to him, I think we're actually asking the wrong questions. I think we should be asking just one. And then I sort of hesitated and I thought, no, I'm just going to go for it. So I said to him, I think we should just ask this one question of all leaders that we're assessing for credentials: are you insecure? Because insecure leaders hurt people. They don't mean to hurt people, but when the pressures of leadership mount and fear increases and this sort of pressure cooker comes upon people, insecure people don't like that feeling of out of control, and so you want to control. And as people's desire to control goes up, people in churches get hurt. If you want to know if someone is safe in life, if they're a safe person, next time they ask you for something, just say no and see the response you get. See where that goes. That will tell you an awful lot about whether they're a safe person. When you go for your driver's license, you'll find that you are given multiple choice questions, but you had no choice over the family you're born into, whether your parents, their relationship flourished or fell apart. You had no choice over even how love was expressed to you or shown. And stuff happens in life that through no fault of our own leaves us feeling a little insecure, a little bit broken. It's not my fault that I'm bald. And last Christmas, Coral gave me a really nice comb as a gift. And I must have looked a little bit sort of confused. And so she explained, she said to me that she gave it to me because she wanted me to have something that I would never part with. Now, I'm saying that really just to put a smile on Dave Sharman's face, because Dave, I know you're stuck in Sydney, you're trying to get to America, and things haven't quite worked yet, and you're stuck waiting to sort this stuff out. So that was just for you, Dave. But somewhere in life, our own actions, our own decisions start to impact on us, and often in a negative way, which doesn't make sense if life is all about carrots and sticks. If everything we are doing is just simply a choice between doing good things, well, that makes sense, and we're trying to avoid bad things. Now, Freud called that the pleasure principle. But Freud was wrong. So why do we do things against our better judgment? Well, scientists have recently discovered that neurologically, everything we do is to escape discomfort. Physically, if you start to feel cold, your brain says, this is uncomfortable. And so you put on a jumper, you turn the heater on, you get the fire on. I'm still struggling with how cold it is here in Victoria after the years we've spent in Sydney. My brain's saying all the time, this is uncomfortable, uncomfortable, uncomfortable. If you're hungry, your brain says you're uncomfortable. And so if the meal's not ready, I know that I raid the cupboards, I raid the fridge, I'll search for anything to eat when I'm feeling hungry. And physiologically, it works the same. If you're bored, if you're lonely, you'll go to your social media of choice. If you're uncertain, you're going to Google, find out something. Tomorrow morning, I will start the preparation for next Sunday's talk with you guys. Now, that is not because I'm organised, because if you know me, that's not true. But I do it because I want to avoid that awful feeling of midnight, Saturday night, and being unprepared. I sometimes feel like Sundays come around every 5 days. And so to avoid that pressure, I start early. Some Sunday afternoons, I start already working on what's coming for the next week. My son-in-law, even when he's on holidays here down in Bairnsdale with us, Aaron, he will go for a run every night. 6-7 kilometres a night he will run. After tea, he'll go for a run. Now, you'd think that is because he wants to be fit. But see, deep down, he does it because he doesn't want to feel bad for all the rubbish that he's been eating on holidays, all the chocolate bars, all the secret little stash he keeps away from everyone else in the house. He just hides that for himself. And so he goes for a run, and it might be a really cold, wet night, and he'll go for a run because he will feel worse if he stays sitting in the warm house. Because, see, life is not so much about time management as pain management. I remember years ago in Bairnsdale, we'd finished our youth program, it was a Friday night, and everyone was gone, and then a girl that normally came turned up, and she was just really upset. She was crying, and she asked if she could talk with me. And she explained that she had been with 2 different guys that night, and she's just said to me, Lex, I just want to feel loved, and now all I feel is dirty and used. And what happens is that we criticise people for moral failures, but that teenage girl, she didn't know how to deal with the discomfort of feeling unloved. She didn't know how to deal with the pain of not being valued. And she tried to do something and it didn't work, and she felt worse. And we're all vulnerable. Paul, who wrote a big chunk of the New Testament, in Romans chapter 7, he writes this: I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. I love the fact that Paul is really honest with us. But what I love more is that that's not where Paul stops. He goes on at the beginning of chapter 8, and Paul says this: but if you belong to Jesus, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin, has freed you from this discomfort, this internal discomfort that won't go away, that leads to death, that leads to us doing the things that we don't want to do, that we know don't work, but we still do them. But how does all that work? Well, if you've hung around church long enough, you'll start to think that Jesus is the answer to every problem. But Jesus himself is not the answer to the deepest longings of the human heart. If he was, God got it wrong when he created woman. Because back in the garden, where Adam is in this perfect world, in perfect relationship with God, he's feeling a discomfort, and he doesn't know what it is, and God diagnoses it, not Adam. And God declares that it's not good for man to be alone. And that was before rebellion entered the world and messed up the world that we know, rebellion against God. And now, in our broken world, a man is not enough. A woman is not enough. Jesus himself is not enough to satisfy those deep longings of the human heart. But Jesus has created something that is. Without him, it doesn't work. Without the Holy Spirit, it's impossible. And it's fellowskop. That's right, fellowskop. The answer to the discomfort that we feel inside. The answer to the longings to be loved, to be valued, to have meaning and purpose, to belong, is fellowskop. Like, you knew that. Like, it's obvious. Fellowskop, of course, you knew that. Well, maybe I should explain fellowskop. Fellowskop is one of the 4 big foundation items that the early church was built upon. And Luke puts it right beside correct Bible teaching and prayer. Fellowskop as a mate that sort of works with him together. Now, when Luke gives us the headlines of these big 4 ticket items that made the early church work and flourish, he does something next after the headlines that's a bit surprising. He leaves out Bible teaching and prayer, and when he explains what really worked, he raves about fellowskop and his mate, which, if you can understand from Luke's perspective, that makes sense, because this had never been part of old Jewish temple worship, temple culture, Israel's culture. Fellowskop had never been part of their experience with God. But now, through the Holy Spirit, it is possible. And you'll find fellowskop being mentioned all through the New Testament, but you'll never find it in the Old Testament. Here's the problem. Whenever you put 4 things together, as human beings, we somehow rank them. We somehow give them priorities. We think, well, one is more important than the other. We base that on our personalities, our preferences, our beliefs, our values. Like, for example, if you try to separate the spiritual and the physical needs of a human being, somewhere along the line, you'll think that one is more important than the other. Some denominations are built around the emphasis on one more than the other. But God doesn't split them. God doesn't separate them. And as Luke's describing this first church, he says it's full of joy. It's a church that on their Facebook page, there's all these likes from the community. There's all these shares from the community. And that people are being added to this new little startup church. Well, I say little, but that's actually wrong. It was big. And this church, the story of it is so different to the story of many of our churches in Australia today, where the community, everyone in the community loves them, where there's new people being added every day. And yet, every church in Australia is doing their very best. Every church would be based around Bible teaching. It would include prayer. But perhaps we've lost one of the ingredients. Perhaps fellowskop has sort of just slipped away. We may even have dropped his mate off the radar, or he might be hanging around. Now remember, everything we do is to escape discomfort. And if your stereotype of a church is a place where if you go, you'll be told that you're doing things wrong in your life, that you are a sinner, that you're going to hell, that you need God's forgiveness. Well, you're already probably feeling bad enough about yourself. That's not going to help you walk through the doors of a church for the first time. Why would you come if that's true? I can remember for a number of years, Coral needed some fillings in her head, like her teeth, right? She was in pain sometimes, but I'd say go to the dentist. No. Why don't you want to go to the dentist? Well, they'll just tell me off for the holes in my teeth. And if you think you're going to get told off for the problems that you've got, we hesitate, we pull back. If you don't think the deepest longings of your heart are going to be met in a local church, you're going to search and you're going to seek in other ways, but that's a problem. Because if you don't find God's solution to the discomfort and pain, we are left with people or chemicals to get the deepest longings of our heart met. And we know that that doesn't work. Long term, it just doesn't work. If you look at the rise in mental health issues, what really is going on with mental health is that there is a discomfort inside. So what is Phallus Cop? Well, his mate is a good old Aussie barbecue. It's when we eat together, when we build true friendship around sharing food. If you have a really good friend in your life, I guarantee somewhere you've eaten food together. You've shared food together. And so Phallus Cop has this mate and they work together, but that's not Phallus Cop. Phallus Cop is more complicated. It's deeper. It's multifaceted. It's richer. About 17 years ago, I went to Texas in America, and I went there to set up a private quarantine station to import Angora goat genetics, frozen semen embryos into Australia. We arrived at this southern Texas town called Kerrville, population of 20,000 people. In this town of 20,000 people, there were 90 healthy churches. It was weird. It's like everywhere we went, everyone was a Christian. We would go to these ranches to buy these Angora goats, and we would say we're from Australia, and we start talking, and we'd discover they're a Christian, and we're Christians. And there was this relational connection. It was just instant, bang. It was there everywhere we went. Even when we collected the embryos this one day, a government vet came. We'd never met them before, and they walked into the veterinary clinic where we're collecting these embryos, and he walks in, he says, "Morning, everyone." He said, "Well, it's going to be a great day. Me and the Lord have had a good conversation. He's told me it's going to be..." Like, he just assumed I was a Christian. But I could have been some atheist from Australia. He didn't know. But there was this relational connection in the community because everyone assumed everyone else were Christians. Relationally, that's just a position that's there. It's instant. It's there. When I was on a Facebook page about hunting dogs, someone saw what I'd posted, and they were in Tasmania, and his name's Jeffrey, and he contacted me on Facebook to be friends. And when I looked at his little thing, it came up with one mutual friend, Dave Palmer. And so I messaged back to him and I said, "So how do you know Dave?" And he goes, "I'm a Christian." And I replied back, "Well, I'm a Christian." And so that instant relationship was connected just on that one factor. Another aspect to Phallus Cop is, I probably can explain it this way. When we set this quarantine station up in Texas, we had to find private property to run it on. And we found a retired vet who owned 5 acres beside his house. So we set up this private quarantine station on his place. And as soon as he found out we were Christians and he was a Christian, there was this instant relational bit. But then he started to feel like what he was doing was historic, that he was forming a partnership with us, that there was this something big thing going on. And so he felt like this was like the culmination of all his life's work, and it was very detailed, very involved. And finally, after all the embryos were collected and frozen in big liquid nitrogen canisters, he took all the genetic material, all the paperwork to the government office to hand it all over and to sign off. He was the only one that could sign off on all the paperwork. As he handed the paperwork over, he died. He had a heart attack and died there in the government office, having just handed over all this paperwork. And talking to his wife in the weeks later, she said to me, the only consolation she could carry was, she said that he felt like he was doing something as a partnership with other Christians, and it was more important even than his own welfare, and that he actually still achieved something in that last bit of his life. The thing about Fellas Cop is it feels like a partnership. It's what we do. It includes who we are, but it's doing something together that's bigger than us. Recently, I went on a road trip with Pete, and we went to South Australia to drop some staghound pups off to people. All the way there, all the way back, Pete and I talked. Well, he will tell you I talk more than him, but we both talked. And we shared deep things. We shared really personal things. And there was this sense of companionship as we went. And Fellas Cop feels like companions. It feels like deep, deep friendship. Last week, I mentioned how we've got three new tripods in this room to support the cameras that we've got, and how Dave used his experiences, his skills, his knowledge. When he was in Melbourne, he used his time, resources to chase these down, and a guy, Tom, helped to give us a good price for them. But we couldn't have done that. We couldn't have purchased them without this generosity, without this giving. And Fellas Cop feels like we are stewards of what we have in our hand. It's not like we're owners and it's just keep it all to ourselves. It feels like that I want to give what I have to help others in this adventure we're doing together for God. It feels like stewardship. Our bushfire recovery team, they are probably a great example of what Fellas Cop looks like in real life. They've came together and relationally, bang, instantly, they've got this connection with each other. And then they start to form this partnership where they're doing something bigger than themselves. And then they are very sort of strongly using the resources of other people. They're companions. They're doing this. They're sharing it. It's not just a partnership, but there's a camaraderie going on. And their resources that they're using are other people's resources. That the money that's been raised by other churches. There's a generosity that where people have felt like stewards and not owners of their resources. And so this team is really a great example of Fellas Cop and how it works. Now, if you're wondering, what's this word Fellas Cop? Seriously, Lex, what is it? Well, it's a Norwegian word that I stole, and it's the Norwegian word for fellowship. Now, I want us to have a look at Christian fellowship, authentic fellowship in a fresh way, because that word is a tired word. It's been watered down. It's lost its power. It was brand new to the early church, and they were really excited about it, but it's just got old and tired as a word. The Greek word is koinonia. But I want us to do this in a way today that we could look at it in a fresh way, that we could devote ourselves to it. Because that early church, it said they devoted themselves to this thing. And it's very powerful. I'm going to read that to us right now. And you may have read this before. It's in Acts chapter 2, verses 41 to 47. But don't miss the excitement that Luke is feeling, because this is brand new to them. This is exciting. They've never seen this. And don't think small when you think of the small church, because they've already just introduced 3,000 people on one day. When Peter gets up and shares his first little preaching gig, 3,000 people respond. And in verse 41 it says, those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. That's a big church. I do find it interesting that when Moses introduced law, this covenant of blessing and curses, 3,000 people that day were put to death. When Peter introduced this new covenant, a covenant of grace where healing and wholeness comes, where the Holy Spirit is given and promised is given, that day 3,000 people were saved. So here's the story of the early church. I'm going to read it to you now. It begins at verse 42. They, which is this 3,000 people, devoted, which is a really strong word. It's not accidentally. It means they've got this commitment to it. Like, if you're devoted to something, you put your whole energy and passion into it. You pursue it. People, when they want to get the latest new iPhone or whatever, they are devoted. They stay in line for days to get the first ones. It says they devoted themselves. It wasn't someone else telling them. They devoted themselves. And here's the 4 things: to the apostles' teaching and fellowship and the breaking of bread and prayer. And everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. Because what's coming next is like, the start was the headlines, now this is the detail. All the believers were together, and everything they had in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who need. They considered other people more important than what they owned. And every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes, and together they ate with a glad and sincere hearts. They're authentic in all their dealings, relationships with each other. And they're praising God, and they're enjoying the favour of all people. And the Lord added to their numbers daily those who are being saved. That's an expanding church. It's a large church. And when Luke gives us these big 4, he gives us Bible teaching, fellowship in all its facets, eating together, which also included communion, but it was eating together. It was physically a meal shared, and praying together. Now, of all those 4 big things, only one of them, just one, can we do through Red Gum Live. As we stream this out, basically you're getting, hopefully, correct Bible teaching. But we've got this idea called Red Gum at Home, where we're going to gather in small homes. Now, right at the moment, the government's just changed the game a little bit, and we're restricted to 1 family plus 5 people. But we can do that, and we can all gather together, and we can start to get these other 3 things happening, because all 4 can happen if we gather together in homes. We can have Bible teaching. We can pray for each other. We can see the needs of another human being and be touched with compassion and reach out. We can physically and financially help someone. We can see what we can do to help. We can develop true fellowship together. Because, see, when we started Red Gum, we were determined from the beginning that Red Gum would be founded on community, discipleship. When we did our first public Sunday, we also launched our GTM, our Growing to Maturity groups, to bring healing and wholeness to people. Because we wanted the Sunday event to be icing on the cake and not the cake. We're just going to use this time right now in the history of Australia to build a true sense of community within everyone we can. We want you to gather and invite people that are not even part of Red Gum, but can just be part of this sense of fellowship that is authentic, it's community, it's real. Like, if you've ever experienced this, you'll never forget it. You'll forget the word fellowscop. That's just a silly throwaway word, right? But we're going to build this thing, and it's going to be nourishing to every longing of the human heart. It's going to bring healing when you've felt pain and when you felt discomfort. You're going to find answers, because we are doing all that the early church did that worked. Next week, I've got something. We're going to start off with something special. I've got some little interviews we're going to do, and you're going to find next week encouraging, and we may even have one other surprise, but I'm still not sure if that's going to happen yet, so you'll have to wait and see. So thank you for being part of this morning. I'm just going to hand over to Steve, and I'm just going to pray for a moment. Lord, I thank you that you care so much for every single aspect of the human heart and soul and spirit and mind and physicalness, and you don't separate those things. You want to minister to all. And I thank you that only in a local church that takes your truth, that ministers to people at every level, that prays about things, thanks you for things, that there's joy, there's a sincerity about all we do. In that community, only there can the fullness of everything you have woven into our needs can be met. And I thank you for that. Over to you, Steve.